welcome to Fit to Speak from the Archives. I'm Eugene, Obah, glad as ever to be with you. Today, we revisit the October 1st, 2020 edition, in which we continued the conversation around podcasting and content creation in the novel coronavirus pandemic. We'll pick up where we left off with podcast host Kristan Vermeulen, wrap up with Brittany Johnson and journalist Marcus Dowling. Oh, and I will have a little note about Kristan's podcast. So, without further ado, let's get to it. Hello and welcome to Fit to Speak. I'm Eugene Obah. So glad to have you with us. Today we continue our conversation about podcasting and content creation in this global pandemic with Marcus Dowling and Brittany Johnson. That's coming up a little later on in the show. But first, we continue our conversation with Kristan Vermeulen, the host of Makers of Maine. I ask her about the importance of the relatability of the makers in terms of building a national and international audience.
I would say that's very important because we have a wide range of makers here, and while I love to focus on all of them, I feel like there are some that really tell a genuine story and have a good relatable experience to others. While I know there are other makers out there in other states, in Tennessee, there's a lot of leather workers, woodworking people, metalworks, and we have a lot of those here in Maine too. So I feel like there's a wide range of network with other makers, as well as those that just have general hobbies and don't have it as a business, but they can relate to it. So I would say that it is very important when it comes to picking and choosing the guests on the podcast.
And that kind of leads me to this. Is there any chance post-pandemic where it's like, okay, maybe do a Makers in Tennessee or, a Makers in Maryland, that sort of thing? Or how, does this spread out elsewhere? Do you see this podcast going elsewhere in the country?
My goal is to do a Makers of New England. So not only does Maine have great makers, and I love every single one of them, and I'm learning more and more about these other makers I never even heard of before, because a lot of them are following me now and subscribing to my podcast, which I'm truly thankful for. But there are so many makers in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont. It just continues to grow and grow. And there's actually a vendor show where it's a Made in New England show, and they showcase it once a year here in Maine as well as down in Massachusetts. And it's so amazing to see all of these New England makers. So that's my goal, is to get it broader to New England. It would be awesome to do Made in USA and do the entire nation, but I feel like that would be a lot. But there's nothing that exists out there right now in the podcast medium. There's no Made in USA podcast. And I hope one day I can fill that niche.
I think you will. There's no doubt about that. I believe you will, Kristan. So really, tell us about some of your favorite stories throughout this podcast. For me, there's a lot that has stood out, for me, as we mentioned, the clean beauty and cosmetic line. Of course, I'm not in that Target demo, but, I was like, this stuff was really, really good. And then, the Roxy Sugar episode for me was just absolutely enthralling. I mean, we're talking about a renowned designer, fashion designer, and everything else. I see here that she donates $20 of her pieces. She, talking about the whole giving back, she donates $20 from the sale of her pieces to the Greater Portland Immigrant Welcome Center, which is, I know, definitely doing a lot of important work. And she was such a great subject for me as a listener, because it's like, when you have such a great subject talking to you and engaging as well, it's not just good for the listener. I'm sure for you, it's great as the host. And I thought it was just really, really remarkable. So really tell us about some of your favorite stories and, go from there.
Man, that is a hard question to answer because I love every single one of them.
Yes.
But I would say the ones that I've seen are very popular from the behind the scenes from my subscribers are Brant and Cochran, which is the axe making guys. They are based down in South Portland. So let's take you back in time to There is a town up north in Maine that was very well known for axe making. And there was about 12 axe manufacturers that were located in this town. And they were around, I think, in the 1800s, and they kind of slow rolled in the 1900s, and all of them shut down, unfortunately. And they made Maine pattern axes. Now, when you think of an axe, which I didn't know about this until when I went to their facility and they showed me all the different axes, different types of axes that they helped restore and the ones that they build. So the Maine pattern axe is shorter because it actually chops Maine wood specifically. Because when you think of the oaks and the types of wood that are here, you need a shorter kind of wedge. So it is very interesting to hear it because the ones down south, they're bigger wedges and they're a lot sharper because the trees are very different. So I find that story is truly remarkable because it gives you education on axes. It gives you education on the history of Maine, as well as connecting to axe making. It celebrates these gentlemen that came together and said, hey, we are going to take this idea and start making Maine pattern axes again. And they are doing so well right now. They have a big wholesaler out west in Washington State that is buying a lot of their axes right now for wholesale. And it's a big success story for them during this pandemic. I'm just so happy for them. So that's one. I'll tell you about another one that I enjoy as well. So Maine Flag Company. So I launched that podcast on Flag Day, and Bethany Field and Chris Corzin, they're sailors, which I am as well. So we connect in that way so much. And sailing is a big deal up here. So what they did is they had this idea of starting a flag making company because there wasn't any up here that existed. So they started making nautical flags at first, then started going into their original state flag. And the Maine state flag, they say they have 3 iterations of the design. And they say it's usually just a pine tree with a blue star on the side. But there's 3 iterations of this design because they couldn't lock down which actual design it was for this. It was truly remarkable. And so to really listen to their story and hear about what goes into the craft of the flag, as well as the history behind it, as well as where they're going now. They're actually making this heart-shaped flag specifically. All donations are going back to the restaurants in the area because restaurants are hurting, and it's going to get worse in the wintertime because you can't do outside, dining anymore. So it's a huge shame. And so yeah, I feel like those are my top favorite, and those are the 2 that are the most popular right now. But there are definitely more to come, and I'm very excited to hear about many more makers for the rest of the year and moving on into 2021.
I hope that we will hear a lot more, Kristan, from all of these makers, and I'd love to even see a follow-up. I think even post-pandemic as to how some of these guys, are doing it in terms of being able to adapt to this new normal, because this is the kind of stuff that we all are doing at this time,
Right.
adapting to a new normal. And that flag episode, by the way, was just also a very good one. I had no idea that there were multiple iterations of the Maine state flag. Um, and being able to kind of sort of restore that, and the original stuff, and that's what was just, again, I'm like, okay, this is
Right.
something. I'm
I
like, this is
know.
very enriching stuff. When you start to put these together for the listeners of the podcast, it's like, how important are the narratives in your show in terms of being able to provide the kind of narratives that nobody else is going to hear, and to have this stuff be so engaging for the listener?
Great question. So I would say that the narrative, so when I think of the narrative, I'm a public relations consultant. That's my full-time job. So when it comes to the narrative, I always say that you have to consider it as a pitch, but it's a long pitch. It's going to be a narrative pitch. So you have to really think about, tell me the story, the history, the inspiration behind your craft. Tell me the process, because honestly, I don't know how an axe is made. I don't know how beauty products are made. I don't know how stitching works and the machinery behind it and all of that. And I know those are very simple questions when you go and ask these makers. They're like, duh, like this is what the process is. I'm like, no, you need to
Yeah.
dim it down because the audience has no idea what this process is. So you have to go through every single step. And it's amazing though, because you learn something and you get some education out of it. And not only do I touch on this, I add some of their personal kind of hobbies or personal questions of like, what's your favorite product? What was your favorite project you worked on in college? You know, with LaCroix, they mentioned how they had their experience with their favorite project while at Maine College of Art. And what I also enjoy too is how they give back. And every single one of these makers has given back in some fashion. And I really want to highlight that. I always say that what makes a story is really highlighting their brand cornerstones. Like, what is it that makes their brand? And let's get it out there. Because I would rather focus on their careabouts rather than, me just saying things that may not be relevant and may not be important to them. So I want to get out the story that they want to get out to the public.
Exactly. And I think as a host, as you're doing this, as I'm doing this program, as we see a lot of people do this program, a lot of these other programs, is that the responsibility of a host, you are kind of sort of the proxy for the audience. You are the advocate for the audience. And as you said, not everybody knows okay, what everything is going on. And as hosts, we're not always the subject matter experts on everything that is thrown to us. It's even
Right.
me myself. It's like as much as I have known you for a long time, it's like even I have to do a research and listen, make sure that I've listened to all of the podcasts to get even the questions I want addressed for our audience to
Yeah.
be answered. I like the fact that all of your makers and all the artisans that are featured on the program are giving back. I mean,
Mhm.
especially now during this time and during this pandemic, and just thinking now. Okay, just thinking now about not just this 100-year pandemic, but also as a lot of people would say, the 400-year pandemic of race and injustice in our society. You had an interview recently with Rose Barboza, and it's my understanding in listening to that interview, which also I thought was remarkable, that until recently, there wasn't a database for Black-owned businesses in Maine. Is that right? And tell us more about Rose and what you've been able to glean from that interview.
Sure. So, come to find out, no, there was no database featuring Black owned business in Maine. And a lot of people didn't really think about that. It's very puzzling, right? Because you think that we respect every maker, any type of maker. And when I reached out to Rose, I was like, I want to make sure that my podcast makes it diverse with the makers because I want to be impactful. There are, people of different cultures and ethnicities in Maine. A lot of people, when they think of Maine, they think of it as the white state, which is not true. There are definitely a lot of other cultures here. We have a lot of immigrants that come in. We also do have a lot of those in the Black community, a lot of people that are Latinos, and there's a lot of different ethnicities. And with Rose, what she has done along with Jerry is that they came up with this fabulous website and reached out to their community saying, hey guys, we want to best promote these businesses. And we also want to help you give back to you in a way where you can, when you're an entrepreneur and you get to get your foot in the door and start a business, we'll give you grants. We'll help you with marketing efforts. Like there's so much that they're doing. And it is remarkable to see the growth that they've had. You could go visit their Instagram, Black Owned Maine, and they have well over 12,000 followers because people understand and they know it's something that needed to be done. And they just launched a new website too, which is remarkable. So
Oh,
it was
really?
just really great just to see that.
No, I think it's very good. When I saw that episode, listened rather, of course, to that episode. I was like, again, shows the this really shows the wealth and depth and breadth of the kind of people you have with these artisans that are
Mhm.
in the States. So I'm glad that diversity in terms of the kind of people that you feature and that you profile is very important to you. And, it's definitely some great stuff right there. And another great stuff that you're doing is this campaign
Mhm.
that you've have been doing on the back of that episode. So tell us a bit more about the campaign that you're doing.
Sure. So I am selling my Makers of Maine t-shirts, and 20% of the proceeds from those shirts will be given back to Black Owned Maine. We just did our first order of pre-orders. I closed that off last Friday, and we'll be moving on to new orders. I'll be doing this like for a long time. All the proceeds will be given back to Black Owned Maine, and I'll also be launching kids shirts as well, because a lot of people said that they really wanted kids shirts to be a part of the collection. So I decided to do that too.
Ah, very, very nice. Very, very nice. And how can people get involved with this campaign? How can people purchase the shirts?
So we have a landing page website set up, and then I coordinate getting that shipped out to folks, or I'm doing a local pickup here in Maine since it's very easy for me. And yes, and each of those shirts that you purchase, 25% of those proceeds will be given back to Black Owned Maine.
When I think about a lot of these podcasts, when I think about a lot of the programs that we see on TV and everything else, I think that engagement is just so important. So engagement is so important to the audience. You have to be able to connect with people and really get a sense of how people are responding to your content. So, what are you doing, in terms of engaging with your audience, especially after these episodes are up? But I just think that again, that this stuff is just so important, and it has not become more challenging now with this pandemic.
I would say right now, our engagement is all organic. So the way that we're getting our audience to grow is really by word of mouth, so grassroots typical marketing, as well as social media. And how we continue that conversation after we get audiences looped in and get them connected to the podcast is really just continuing that social media response and making sure that we get messaging out there, appropriate timing, as well as visuals, because our visuals are outstanding due to our amazing photographer. But also at the same time, it's really getting the makers also and their audience involved and getting them to know what this podcast is all about too. So I find that there's lots of engagement. And I say with the pandemic, I would say we're very lucky to be in this time frame right now, because I see it seems like people have the time to listen to podcasts, because lots of podcasts are long form content. So a lot of people will just go and listen in for maybe like a minute or two, and then they're like, okay, I don't have time for this. I'm going to shut this off. But I find that some people who don't have kids, because I can only imagine those parents who have kids right now, they probably don't have time to listen in. But if they do, props to them. But I would say I would say that a lot of people are listening in. I mean, we have over 2,000 downloads right now of our podcast, and we launched back in June. That's a lot. So we are
Mhm.
very grateful and thankful for that.
So, Kristen, how can people find out more about your podcast?
So our podcast is distributed on multiple channels, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, and Pandora. And on our website, I forgot to mention, you can easily access all of our audios of episodes really on the website.
Very nice. Kristan Vermeulen, the host of Makers of Maine. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Eugene.
I'm fascinated in the sense that when it comes to content creation, the fact that we have the democratization in that space in a conservative environment, in a conservative political environment, is a fascinating thing to consider. Uh, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok as well, all products of the Obama age. Products of creative freedom, digital freedom, like free trade, all of these notions that, include globalism. So we're in the midst of that. We now have a person who's the president who does not believe in any of those things. So Therefore, the idea that you would even create something that would allow for that kind of communication is intriguing in the sense that anything that comes after what happens with TikTok is going to feel actually very similar to like AM radio in like the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. Very like sanitized and fun, like all sorts of music, all sorts of conversation, whatever, but it's all in like seen through one very narrow lens. And I'm intrigued in the sense that that's why the podcasting thing fascinates me insofar as like the creation of new media creators, because we're not going to necessarily get them past TikTok. Like anybody who didn't make it off of TikTok in the last 6 months, game over. Like it's just not possible. So to look at, and it's fascinating because I hope that people that were using TikTok and making the longer form stories, like you were talking about, Brittany, I hope that they're able to do that in a cinematic sense, to be able to like extend those stories out and not have to worry about chopping them into 15-second bits, but being able to like tell those stories more fleshed out. Because I think that's a key part of the future. If we take anything out of what TikTok was, I mean, it's fascinating only to think that like if Donald Trump were president when Twitter was invented, Twitter would have died on the vine like immediately. Like the first second that like any sort of parody account existed, it would have been dead on the vine immediately, which is fascinating to consider given like the last 12 years of our lives.
It's just crazy to me how with all of these social platforms, and here's the interesting thing for me, like during my time at Maryland, and I know for you, Brittany, during your time, we were pretty much graduated around the same time. The thing about it is that we were coming in, Marcus, as
Right.
these platforms were starting to emerge as, okay, these are options right here. There was, I mean, in high school, there was a period of time where pretty much everybody had a MySpace and that sort of thing before
Yeah,
that
of course.
kind of fell off. And then Facebook, you think about Zuckerberg, say what you will about the guy, but Facebook has endured, on up Instagram,
Mhm.
and then Twitter still is a thing, of course. And then when I've looked at TikTok, right, and some of the stuff, and especially among the Generation Z crowd, I mean, this is huge among that
Yeah,
crowd. My question has always been the longevity of the newer platforms, because as you said, Marcus, Vine has gone the way of the dodo bird.
yeah.
Um, TikTok, now we don't know as of the time of this recording, TikTok is still around, but let's just say that Trump and Pompeo are successful in eliminating TikTok. That's going to be a loss of the stuff right there, isn't it? I mean,
Yes, no, because here's the thing. Something to think about is how aggressive Facebook really is these days. Facebook is aggressive in the sense that they capitalize on taking other people's open source technology and turning it into effective ways to extend their own branding. And when it's all open source technology, well, it doesn't really matter now, does it? Like if it was like, if like TikTok owned all their own patents and Reels just didn't exist, if Reels existed, then there would be a reason to say, okay, well, they're stealing somebody's open source technology. We need to like put a stop to this immediately. But that's not happened. So the thing to think about is that for no matter what happens, the most important story in this whole situation is how aggressive Facebook is becoming in the digital tech and communication space. They've used Instagram effectively as a sword to slice and cut and run through anybody's conceptualizations. and welcome them into their fold, their ever widening fold. And if TikTok were to die tomorrow, you would see a push for Instagram Reels that like the likes of which you've never seen before for any sort of social media outlet ever. That's why they've been so aggressive about getting Reels out and into people's hands and pushing people's Reels into your feeds on Instagram because they know, oh God, if TikTok goes the way of the dodo, we're going to take that entire market. So and it's fears is funny. I'm 42. People like I bring up my Fratina's twin daughters all the time. They're 15. They know nothing of Instagram. They refuse to get on the platform because it is uncool.
Even the same with Facebook.
Right? They're like,
most definitely.
Facebook's for grandparents, but for them, they're like, we only do TikTok because our attention spans are such, and we're okay with it. Our attention spans for entertainment are such that we willfully accept 15-second loops are okay. Anything past that is a bit too much. Like that,
Yeah.
that's a real thing. So definitely expect that Facebook's aggressiveness in this marketplace is going to become something of an issue. Like no matter what happens with TikTok, I mean, if TikTok goes away to dodo, then it'll absolutely happen. But if TikTok remains, expect some aggression too, because they've figured out a way, because I'll get all the technologies open source, to be able to be very aggressive and effective in their work.
And what about the the fandoms, right? I mean, like the fan bases of a lot of these creators, a lot of these people, especially of course the big names, of course, especially the Kardashians. Of course, their show is going to be ending on E. I think next year. It's going to be their last season. For me, and for anybody who's known me for a long time, everybody knows that I am a huge fan of Passions. So it was a soap opera on NBC from 1999 to 2007, and then later on DirecTV until 2008. And Natalie Z, who played the second Gwen on the show, and Travis Schultz, who played the original Ethan, they just created a podcast, Passions for Life, just right after the ending of the theme song there. And it was, for me, a very enthralling stuff to listen to because it's like you're dealing with relatively unique subject matter. I mean, the soap operas have gone the way of the dodo bird over the past, several decades now. But if you really think about it, Passions, though, was a very different soap opera to what some of the others, a lot of the others, actually, really all of the others, were doing. More of the stuff of the soap operas were very traditional and very dramatic, and blah
You
blah
guys
blah
have
blah.
magic
Passion
storylines of Passions. You have
was
magic.
just zany. Yes, the magic, the supernatural stuff. I mean, I could go on for all of the things. I loved it for the same reason that a lot of people hated the show. But the thing was that for me, and listening to the podcast that those actors created, it was just enthralling. So I guess the question is, and by the way, I should point out that when I was the co-editor-in-chief of my high school newspaper, I insisted that I write an article in the arts and entertainment section about the impending demise of the time of Passion. So you see what fandom can do to you. So how important, I guess, maybe Brittany, I'll start with you, and then Marcus, how important are these fans, the bases, and all that in terms of supporting a lot of these podcasts, and especially in terms of their subject matter?
They're very important, and it's something that you have to walk a fine line for. I'll say it's something that for most people, most content creators, you want to curate the most dedicated fan base that you possibly can, until that kind of comes back and they get a little too dedicated or they get a little too interested in your product. So I think ideally for anyone, regardless of if you're going for a multi-million-dollar Netflix deal or you're just trying to be the next TikTok star, you have to make sure that you have content that engages your audience, regardless of what your audience needs. And that's another thing. So the reason why television worked for everyone in the 1950s to the 1990s is that you had a captive audience, like Marcus mentioned earlier. You couldn't go anywhere. Like you could watch TV, you could watch a movie, or you could listen to the radio, but those were your three options. Now you have to capture someone's attention, and not only that, capture their attention enough that they will continuously review your product, like your product, share your product, and want to see more content come out of your wheelhouse, regardless of if that is related to the original product they signed up for. And that's hard, and that's legitimately hard. So I think being able to engage your audience and engage your fan base in a way that still lets them know that there's boundaries between, the creator and the content they're creating, but also engages them to the point where they feel like they're one of the crew, one of the people who's making this, someone who has to be there, or else this is, not being made for any other reason. It's very important. So I think the creator that can do that, either through honest means or just in general, just has a once in a lifetime flash of stroke of lightning type of situation, is someone who either can manage that and bring it, continue it on, or just needs to harness it as it comes and then think of other ways to kind of pivot, to be able to use it or take a portion of that audience and move on to their next product. So I think having that as your centralized tenet of cultivate the audience, but don't encourage them to go too far into the fandom of things, is a big kind of balancing act, but it's something that's essential if you're going to be a content creator in the 2020s and onwards.
So I'm intrigued. It's funny that you bring this up. My favorite thing to watch is if people are in love with Animal Crossing during the pandemic.
Right.
Because Animal Crossing is fascinating in the sense that the creator is the content and the content is the creator. And in to that point, so everybody plays Mario Kart, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Nintendo has now created a way for you to be able to put sensors up in your own home so that you can do Mario Kart races with remote control cars
Mm-hmm.
to your own home. So again, the creator is the content and the content is the creator. I'm intrigued by this in the sense that when it gets into podcasting, broadcasting, licensing deals, all of that, you're ultimately creating a situation where you're making it incredibly simple for someone who wants to engage to pay very minimal amount of money for maximal content availability. Because literally everything we do has become a point of content.
So to just kind of sort of tie this all together here,
Yes.
Marcus, on the panel that we had you on in 2013, you said that journalists need to have an emotional connection to the stories that they are telling. Do you still believe that today? And how can people tap into that connection?
Okay, so people read stories. Actually, no. People click clickbait because they care. You don't click clickbait because it's there to be clicked. Like there's a million links on a screen, any screen, anywhere in the world, right now. If I were to go to any site, anywhere, there's like 12 links to be clicked. So why do I click something? Because I care. As a journalist, for me, the importance of telling stories that I care about is that you're going to get some level of imparting from me into the story, a level of why I care about the story. Not so much whether I think something's right or wrong or up or down or left or right, but whether or not I care about this as an issue, or whether or not I care about this as a concept, or whether or not I care about this as like if the quick fox jumped over the lazy dog, then I care about lazy dogs. So I want to make sure that we at least are talking about lazy dogs. So that to me is the reason why you do that. It's because you want people to understand that something is important. Because we've got to a place now, in the end of 7 years since I said that, where the journalist becomes as important now to the story as the story is. So you click on a button because, like, Clinton Yates is one of my friends, but he's also a phenomenal journalist. And whatever Clinton does, I click on it because I'm like, okay, cool. He's going to explain to me why this is important or why this, why this fly ball mattered. So I'm like, okay, I'll click on it. Bam. And then I get the story told flatly, but with a level of importance to it that platforms it in my mind as something that truly matters. So that's why you tell stories that you care about, because you're able to then impart the amount of impact you want on the reader for that story. Again, even if it's the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog, we care about lazy dogs, so therefore this story matters. That is the most important thing to remember, especially right now. Because why did the COVID story pop and the fire story didn't? Because more people care about people literally dying from an airborne illness than they could connect to the forest burning. When the story suddenly became the sky is orange, I care about that. I'm gonna tell you all about why the sky is orange matters. Oh my God, like everybody's got their story, they're writing it out, boom, 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 boom. And now we finally, some 2 weeks after the fire started burning, right? 2 weeks later, the sky is orange. That's the story that somebody cares about, so that impact hits the page. And that's important. That's the most important thing. Like, if you don't tell stories that you don't care about, then you don't get that level infused into what you're doing, which is important, because then that creates the thing that makes people care.
I think the way forward, at least for the time being, is we just have to wait and see. We just have to wait and see what's going to be the case here with so much of these platforms. How is Netflix going to respond to some of these challenges? As we said, they have not had a big stuff since Tiger King. And when Tiger King has been the most normal part of 2020, and then think about the fact that Carol Baskin competed on Dancing with the Stars. She was eliminated Monday night. That in and of itself, that is an interesting stuff that we're going to have to kind of sort of explore for another time. But I thank you guys really so much for this opportunity to speak to you.
You're welcome.
Marcus Dowling and Brittany Johnson, thank you guys so much for joining me today.
You're welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Folks, what a great conversation with Marcus, Brittany, and Kristan. And let me just say about Kristan real quick. When looking at the entire podcasting genre and thinking about the nearly 2 years since this program aired, I'll tell you that Kristan has remained the only person in that time to speak successfully and consistently about the maker economy, not just in Maine, but now nationwide in a expanded podcast, Makers of the USA. It's gratifying to see that Kristan has achieved her goal, as she mentioned earlier on, of taking her podcast nationwide. And I'll tell you that the attention that she has received and that the podcast has received, even across the pond, it definitely speaks for itself. I think what Kristan has done insofar as carving out a lane in this crowded podcasting market, which really anyone looking to enter the market should be doing, is absolutely terrific. And I highly encourage you to make Makers of the USA part of your listening experience. You can go to makersoftheusa.com and listen to the episodes wherever you get your podcasts. Finally, on our Substack page, as well as our YouTube channel, you can watch a bonus clip of my interview with Kristan, in which she talked to Rose Barboza, who was mentioned earlier in the program. Rose's comparison of starting a small business in Maine as opposed to Maryland, I found rather fascinating and hope you do as well. So go to csemedia.substack.com right now and subscribe. Do join us next week on Fit to Speak from the Archives. We started a series of shows about college in the COVID era. I spoke with journalist Clara Longer-DeFreitas about her reporting in the Diamondback on COVID, and I got her thoughts about student journalism, including this Washington Post article, which stated that student journalists were the heroes of the pandemic era. And I spoke with Brian Dornovich, the CEO of Alpha Efficiency, about a tweet that he posted about college being a scam. Isn't really, especially now that the college experience has returned to relative normal. But one thing's for sure, as the fall semester gets underway, it'll be very nice indeed to revisit these conversations, so I hope you'll be able to join us. Do realize, though, that there's no extra credit on the Fit to Speak from the Archives syllabus. In the meantime, be sure to follow us on all of our social media accounts, and be sure to check out our Substack and Patreon pages for exclusive content and to support all the work that we do here. Finally, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell on our YouTube channel so that you do not miss any of our episodes. Until next week, I'm Eugene Obah. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, the best things in life are worth saving.